thing must have been practically a banger before you started. What was it worth?
It was indeed. I suppose 50, 60 pounds, something of that order.
1960. And how much mileage had it done?
About 180,000. Been around the clock, and she was showing about 80.
I'll have to leave it to you to tell me exactly what you did. It looks as though you'd done everything, completely rebuilt it.
Well, we did a fair bit. There was a great deal in things that were left undone as well, purposely. But basically, we couldn't do a great deal of tuning on the engine to make it go very fast, because the fuels that we were likely to encounter in some of the socialist countries were not of the very best.
Well, obviously you were more interested in reliability than in speed.
Well,
what did you have to replace of the basic things?
Well, we completely overhauled the engine. As I say, we had to keep the tuning side of it down and, as you say, work for reliability solely. We had to strengthen the back of the vehicle, I'll show you that in a moment, and put on a certain amount of equipment to make life safer and more comfortable.
What sort of carburettor did you use?
Well, this is, as you can see, it's not the one that Henry originally put on the car. It's a Japanese twin-choke carburettor. Its main virtue is that you have one small choke running until you want a bit of extra power. Second pressure on the accelerator brings in an additional bigger choke, and away you go.
And obviously you could use it with very low-grade petrol.
Yes, we were quite successful on that. The petrol wasn't the very best, but she went very well.
One thing I've been looking at with some kind of horror is the wiring. You've obviously redone it, but it looks like spaghetti junction. Why did you leave it like that?
Well, I was a mechanic on the trip, and if anything went wrong, I wanted to be able to find where it was without having to delve into looms, and therefore I simply left it as it was. Everything is wired. Everything is there individually, and I can spot any fault. Is
the fixed fire extinguisher for the sake of the wiring?
Well, partly wiring. Pessimism on my part, possibly partly the carburettor. They're a good idea. They're completely automatic. It's heat sensitive. If there's any flame from this area, this will discharge automatically without our necessarily knowing that there was a fire.
Of all the things that you did to this, what was the most important? The one thing that you feel, if I hadn't done that, I couldn't have done the trip?
Comfort, I think. Without the seats involved, it just wouldn't have been possible.
How many hours a day did you reckon to spend in these seats?
About 20 hours out of every 24, so you'd be 10 hours outside and 10 hours on this side.
Doing what? Driving and sleeping,
driving and sleeping alternately. 4 hours driving, 4 hours if you weren't required for either navigation or for looking around the back of the truck in front of you, you could sleep.
How many hours, not how many hours, but rather how many miles a day did this mean covering?
We reckon to cover about 800 miles every 24 hours.
So you had to keep up a fairly
I think
close average speed?
Yes, I think the overall average speed is about 40 miles an hour. This, out of this you have to take any stops for photographs, the odd cup of tea and such like.
And this is your average speed clock?
Yes, it's a very useful instrument for this type of driving, though it would hardly suit the suburban commuter, but it tells you both the exact distance coverage, which can be zeroed at any time, and is exactly accurate. It also has, there are two dials on it. One of them you can set up a desired average speed, and the second one in effect tells you whether you're running ahead or behind that speed.
What about the rest of the extra instruments that you've got there?
Well, right in front of the driver, of course, you have the rev counter, the tachometer. The two instruments on the top row there are the voltage meter. It tells you exactly how many volts are in the battery. The time clock, of course, and on the lower row, on the left-hand side, one of the most important instruments, probably not on the average family car, is the oil temperature gauge. Beside you have the water temperature gauge and the oil pressure, and on the right the amps.
There's one thing I want to find, that's the control of your tram bell in front.
It's just your right hand there, the one beside the ignition switch, exactly. So we used it mainly for fun. It had a rather electrifying effect if you rang it at a tram, or alternatively at a motorist on a motorway in any part. If you approached him from the rear and rang a tram bell, there was a rather extraordinary effect. We used it to sort of break the ice with a lot of people, with customs people and policemen and so on and so forth. Introduced ourselves as an Irish tram. They thought it was very funny, and we took it on from there.
When you were driving in Moscow and you're driving in any of the Eastern European countries, what was the traffic like?
It was pretty hair-raising. I found that they're very good drivers themselves, but between trying to find your way to where you're going and driving as fast as they do, and they drive very fast indeed, especially in Moscow, where they're very broad streets. You have 6 lanes of traffic dashing along, rather like lemmings, we thought, to the sea. And looking for a turning was a hazardous process. I found it pretty tough going in the cities. The country was fine, the cities was...
and the road surfaces?
The road surfaces varied very much. In the towns in Russia and most of the Eastern European countries, they are very, very old roads, and you have not so much potholes as manhole covers recessed some 8 inches into the road, which the Russians and their friends drive over quite happily in their cars. We found that we had to go around them. Having been into one or two, we had to go around the long way, which added to our problem somewhat. Out in the country, the surfaces were very mixed. Sometimes there was no surface, sometimes it was relatively good. But you could come down a long hill into a dip, see the road coming up the other side, but find that right in the middle of the dip there was a colossal bump, and it was too late to do very much except go over it.
Doing 800 miles a day, and this seems absolutely impossible, you must never have stopped to eat.
Well, we lived on sort of slimming biscuits most of the way, which were fine actually. The various different flavours, and we had boxes and boxes of them. They were quite nice.
And you just sat in the car and drove and slept and munched biscuits.
Drove and ate and slept and ate, that was about it.
You must be absolutely mad. Apart from all that you did to the engine, all you did to the inside of this cab, I suppose the basic thing was strengthening the chassis so it would stand up to 8-inch potholes.
Well, we tried to strengthen it as far as we could. We'd been warned about the roads, though we didn't imagine quite the surface we were going to meet. I could show you, actually, better from the rear of the vehicle, just what we did in that line.
Yeah.
Would you like to have a look?
What did you have to do to the floor
Well,
of the chassis of it?
In view of the roads we were facing, we had to make her as strong as possible. Now, in fact, she is basically a fairly strong vehicle, but we thought it prudent to cross-brace across there and to weld in a small metal triangle in each corner as far as we could. And you'll also see there's a good deal of glass fibre on the sides. This isn't so much for strength as to cut down the sort of resonance, you know.
An extra petrol tank somewhere?
Yes, we put an additional petrol tank just behind the driver's seat, just under that section of the floor, and you can see the feed coming back to here. One of our problems was that this feed was necessarily going to cross the line of the exhaust system, so you'll see that it has been bound with asbestos and then covered in silver foil.
How much of the work could an amateur do if he didn't happen to own a garage?
Well, providing that he has a good comprehensive toolkit, a normal toolkit, and the various skills involved, he could do the vast majority of the work in his back garden if the rain kept off. Certain things he probably would have to go out and hire, such as a welder, as we saw, for bracing it up and so on, and the actual engineering work of reboring the engine block. He would have to take it to an engineering works, as we did ourselves, and have it rebored. But the rest of it he could very well do, providing he had the skill.
Is there anything that you've used that isn't commercially available, that's experimental or special?
No, I think that's a very important point. In fact, we have used only top quality products which are available. The tyres, the oil, everything is the standard product which you can buy in our shop or any other accessory shop or garage. I think this is very important. There's no experimental stuff or anything like this in it.
Are any of the things that you've done to this van worth doing for the ordinary motorist who's probably never going to leave Ireland?
Well, certainly I wouldn't go anywhere without. I'm a great believer in having very, very good brakes. I wouldn't go anywhere without them. In this case, we put on disc brakes on the front and we added a servo booster. And brakes are essential no matter where you go.
Anything else?
I'm a great believer in having instruments, spotting trouble on the instruments before it becomes expensive trouble. I think that's about it.
You've certainly done an absolutely fantastic job on this van. A lot better than most 1970 ones.